Hi, welcome to our 20th edition of the Hot Desk podcast. I'm Melody Brew from More Insights and Strategy, and I am joined by Robert Kramer. And we are doing a very special edition today of a quick recap of where we've been this past week. Robert was at Adobe Summit in Las Vegas, and I was at Enterprise Connect in Orlando. And now we're both kind of trying to recover from those things, but there was so much to talk about, and let's get going. How are you, Robert?
I'm good. It's a Saturday, and like you just said, we're recovering. But it was such a great week, and it was nice to see some customers, also see some of the our fellow peers, and then diving into some great new announcements that specifically what Adobe had. So I really enjoyed that. It's fantastic.
And I like your Texas
Yeah.
sweatshirt.
I got stuck in the airport in Dallas Fort Worth. I had to reward myself, and because the company is located in Texas, I had to get some apparel. So
Gotta
it was
represent.
the had to
You know,
represent. And
you gotta represent Texas, but I think we need to get Pat to get us our more insights and strategy, some swag. So we'll have to work on that. But yeah, so I have to say I was having major FOMO when you were at Adobe Summit. I went last year. It was when they first announced Firefly and a lot of other things, but Firefly has come such a long way. And I think there was a really big, from what I saw from afar, I tried to join some of the things virtually, although I was at my own conference, which we'll talk about in a bit. But um, what I saw in general was like a big shift from a big shift to kind of talking about enterprise at Summit. And I
Mhm,
think Summit for me has always been like enterprise focused, and Max, I think, focused a little bit more on the creative. But I think with
mhm,
all of these tools, it's no longer one or the other, right? Like
mhm.
the marketers and the creatives really are able to come together now with these tools. We saw that with the IBM campaign that we talked about on our last pod. So tell me what you saw.
Well, and that's a great point that you mentioned the enterprise, because they released their new, what they call it is their Adobe Digital Experience platform, and it's a more complex platform, and it's focused on data and content and the customer journey. So no shocker that data and AI is a big part of this Adobe Summit, but they released this new platform that to me is fantastic. And I really like what you just mentioned about the Firefly, which personalizes the experience for the marketing department. But this platform is very extensive, and it has a lot of different elements, but it can be seen as a little confusing if you're not the power user. But some of the things that it had in it was this new Adobe experience with the AI assistants, which is fantastic. This the Gen Studio, which is extension to allow you to have more management over your content. And then they had a unified experience with the customer journey, helping with the collaboration with all the tools that I just mentioned and more. But I still think it falls back on the issue of data and how you get a standardization to have your data sets in a space where it can be maximized by all these different features. So they have what's called the CDP, which the data can go into, but getting it there is going to be kind of a task. But they they have it planned well, but not to the point where the data is going to be standardized where I feel comfortable with it. But it was a very good conference all in all.
Yeah, they talk a lot about the supply chain, the content supply chain.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, when you think about the content supply chain from like ideation to creation and then also
Hmm.
measurement, there's so much that goes into that. And one of the reasons for that is just the amount of marketing material that companies need now. And I think that's
Hmm.
where, like the creative process and the marketing process. And, as a former marketer, sometimes I sort of take offense to that as if like marketers aren't creative, but I'm not
Sure
I'm
do.
not creative the way that some of these people are creative, right? And so I think that the magic in that is the ability for those two teams to collaborate, where the marketers have control over the things like, the customer journey and the data
Hmm.
and the content creators still have control over over the creation of it. We're not just handing this over to AI. AI is just kind of, I think, supercharging people. There's this big,
Good point.
concern, I think, about, especially in the creative community, that, like, we saw this, like, with the film strike, that Hollywood is afraid that AI is going to replace creativity. It's not going to. And so I think that Adobe has done a really good job of putting in creative controls that work for marketers, but also give creatives the opportunity to be creative. Firefly
Hmm.
does not just create something for you. It did initially. The first edition of Firefly was like, you put in a prompt and it gives you a fire breathing dragon or whatever it was. But the second edition of Firefly that I saw was, I mean, you can adjust on photos, you adjust aperture, you adjust color,
Hmm.
there's generative fill. There are so many features that allow you to really customize that creative that then
Yep.
goes into the enterprise, right? And that's where sort of the enterprise side takes over. And there's all those data analytics tool to see, how is this performing? It allows you to iterate on all of these campaigns and go and see, how is it performing? So to your point, if you don't have the right data in there, if you're, garbage in, garbage out, we've heard that a million times, right? So I guess that's the challenge, right? And if you're not starting with what do you know, the more you know about your customer, obviously, the better you're going to produce for
Right.
that experience.
I think that their products and features are phenomenal. The Firefly allows you to take it to that personalization, like you talked about. I think that what's interesting, when we were doing marketing, we had to do a lot of this manual. So if you just take a step back away from the data, and you have these features, you can personalize it very quickly by company, by region, by country, by language, and you can change everything that you want on the fly. And you mentioned the content supply chain, how you can, not only activate and manage, but you can measure. There's all these amazing features. The collaboration tools are fantastic, but it does go back to that data management strategy and how do we put our data in a spot to get it to these tools that we want to be able to use. I think there's a gap there,
Mhm.
but at the same time, Adobe is trying to get us there, and they very much showed us that at this conference, which was fantastic. One of the ones that I really liked was how they actually had Major League Baseball. They actually went through what Major League Baseball is doing and how they're actually enhancing the fan experience using products like we just talked about, and on multiple levels. And I thought that was very intriguing. And we're getting ready to start a series, in the next couple of months, talking about how these IT companies are impacting these large sporting teams with their technology to beyond just the sponsorship. And Adobe showed us this at the conference, which I thought was really cool because we didn't expect Major League Baseball to be out there talking about what they're getting out of Adobe. So very excited about that last one that I just mentioned.
Well, that's cool. You had Shaq and MLB. I mean, that's kind of
Yep.
cool, right?
They
And
didn't, not together though.
not together. Actually, that's funny. But Shaq can do a lot of things. If he can play basketball and spin records, maybe he can play baseball too. But
Yep.
that's actually a really good segue into where I was, which was Enterprise
Yeah.
Connect. Um,
So tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, so I think the reason why that's a good segue is because there are a lot of communications platforms that are doing sponsorships with sporting franchises also, and MLB. So Zoom, for instance, has a sponsorship with MLB Replay Center. I'm actually going to be there in
Hmm.
May. Really excited to see that. Um, and Ring Central has a partnership with the Warriors. These aren't just partnerships where, you know, logos are slapped on a building. They actually use the communications platforms within the organization to make the like the communication better. And some of it is internal, some of it is external, like the replay center. That's more consumer facing, even though it's making things easier for the organization, but they also
Hmm.
get that you watch it live on TV, you get to see it. But just having contact center solutions, all of that. Well, these are the types of things, getting to that, these are the types of things that were happening at Enterprise Connect. Enterprise Connect is a yearly event. I think this is like the 30th year.
Wow.
It's been happening for a long time. It's like the Unified Communications conference. Everybody from Unified Communications and now Collaboration is there. And I think it did start out as a Unified Communications conference and kind of started with, collaboration started to be a part of that conversation. What I see now happening is collaboration is the main conversation. It's communication is, of course, like the underpinning, but
Hmm.
that's telephony. That's all of the tools that we need just to have like the base layer of communication. But I think a good example of this is Avaya announced a partnership with Zoom. So Zoom has a new collaboration Zoom Workplace, which is a collaboration platform. And Avaya announced this partnership with Zoom for Zoom Workplace. So, Avaya is sort of the underpinning communication layer, and then they have kind of this like build as what Avaya calls is choose your own journey. They're
Mm.
not saying like put Avaya in everywhere or rip anything else out. They're just saying we're going to partner with whoever it takes to get our customers to this end state that they want to be in. And so they partner with Teams, they partner with Zoom, they partner with a lot of with actually with Ring Central as well. So that was one of the big announcements. And it's not just collaboration. We talk about collaboration as in like you and I can collaborate on, like, say, a document over Zoom Workplace or whatever.
Hmm.
We're also seeing just a lot of companies collaborate together. Actually, last year at Enterprise Connect, Cisco and Microsoft made a big announcement, and people were like, whoa, Cisco and Microsoft on the stage at the same time. But it's just getting to that because it's all about what the customer wants. And
Right.
I think Avaya's Choose Your Own Journey, that's resonating, I think, throughout the entire industry, where that's, you see like lots of devices that are certified, Zoom certified and Microsoft Teams certified. And they're platforms that are, they say that most companies use at least two platforms. So you may like maybe, we do, right? So like we're on chat, but then we go and we're
Hmm.
on StreamYard and then we have a call on Teams. And so you have to be prepared to be able to use a lot of those platforms. And so I think that's really been a huge theme throughout some of these conferences and these
Well,
shows.
don't you think the ecosystems are just a gigantic strength of these companies because who they're aligned with, just like you mentioned before, benefits the customer. And it's all about the customer, like you also just said. So at these ecosystems, when companies are or customers are getting ready to buy, that's a probably a checkbox that they want to take a look at this ecosystem to make sure it lines up with their not necessarily their needs today, but in 5 years and work your way backwards and say, I see these companies on the list, these different categories that I think we're going to need or definitely need, and then that really resembles what they go forward with.
What they need. Yeah, and
Yep.
I think, there's been a lot of talk about IT sort of like wanting to consolidate and not have too many different vendors. I don't necessarily think that that's going to make companies choose one or the other, but in some cases, consolidation is great on that, but partnership really helps with that. It's almost like a combined SKU, where you can have Avaya with Zoom. You can have
Hmm.
Ring Central with Teams. It's no longer just one or the other. And so I think that's kind of a smart way to play this.
Yeah. Yep. I don't see that going backwards. I see it going forward with these companies' technology stacks are just massive. I think there's like 30,000 plus SaaS providers. And then at the same time, companies have over 130 SaaS applications. So if you look at that, this technology stack is going, it's growing. So consolidation would be fantastic because then that would help the whole data quality.
Yeah, well, good point. Back to it all comes back to data at some point, right? Yeah, so a couple of other big announcements, and I think, we'll get into kind of a deeper dive into a lot of this, probably more in like a written article or research note. And also Monday, we'll talk a little bit deeper about a few things on our
Yep.
regular podcast, which we'll talk more about where that's going in a bit. But Five9 announced a Gen AI studio, which is kind of a centralized hub for like building and testing and deploying customers' own well, kind of do it yourself sort of Gen AI powered applications. And this
Hmm.
is like the first sort of enterprise ready AI solution, kind of like it's like like click and go basically for enterprise. So that was kind of one of the bigger announcements. Obviously, we talked about Avaya and Zoom. Of course, there were tons of announcements from Microsoft, from Teams. One thing that I thought was really cool in Teams was this voice isolation. So,
Hmm.
we see noise cancellation on pretty much every platform, but they have this really cool voice isolation where it actually, so if you're in a crowded room and you can cancel out some noise like your dog barking or traffic or whatever, but it's going to have to distinguish your voice versus if somebody's talking next to you. So it actually can learn your voice and start to isolate your voice
Wow,
and tune out the others around you, which is really cool. There's also some
that is neat.
customized feeds, intelligent call recap. That's something that we're starting to see across the board, not just like meeting summary, but call recap. So when this is particularly, important in customer service where you're doing mostly calls. This enables you to kind of get that call summary. It can be for meetings, it can be for calls, but really getting that call recap so that that saves time from having to, do that whole report at the end. And then, of course, tons of Copilot stuff. Um, I think the Copilot, not so Copilot with a capital C and Copilot with a lowercase c. When we talk about Copilot with a capital C, I'm talking about Microsoft Copilot. They've had, they've released some adoption numbers. They've talked a little bit about, their customers wanting to keep it, um, how much they benefit from it. I think that so far this data is really anecdotal. They're just asking
Mm.
customers, like, how do you feel about this? It's a hard thing to really study. And I had a really interesting conversation actually with Javed Khan from Cisco WebEx. He runs that department. And he talked a lot about how they're looking at their AI assistant, the WebEx AI assistant, which they're not calling Copilot,
Yeah.
um, and where they're learning is actually from non-adoption, not from adoption. So they're taking a look at their features and they're talking to their customers and they're saying, we're seeing that this isn't being used as much as this is. Why not? And they're learning from their customers and they're building for the needs of the customers. They're not saying, you're not using this enough, let's teach you how to use it. They're saying, what are you using? What do you need? And they're building
Hmm.
for it. And I think, I think that's just really important because if customers aren't using these tools, then they're not going to keep them. And when you have things that are like $30 per person per month, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have, tens of thousands of
And
people in an organization, that's a lot. And you don't want to waste that, there's that the compute power, the all of the things that go into that an organization needs to be um, thinking about beyond just the $30 actually, right? It's not just $30 when you put all of the compute and everything else into it. So you really have to be smart about how you're using these tools. And so seeing how
investment of resources too. You're spending the time, and so
yes.
that's a big
And
commitment.
so I like that there are some, companies that are looking at how is this making employees like kind of supercharging employees. I've talked about this for a long time. I've said like AI is kind of like having an intern. It's not going to do the work for you. It's not going to be perfect, but it should help you. And it should actually be a little bit of a teacher as well. I think that as people start to use AI features more, like the WebEx call center application actually starts to it's like self-learning. So
Hmm.
it learns as you learn. And so employees should be becoming more efficient, not just saving time. I don't think saving time is enough of a an ROI. It should be more about like, what does that time give you back? What is that time doing for you? And I think
Yeah, it
that's
has to make money for you.
and it has to make employees feel like they're doing more important work. Like let the bots do some of the, the tedious stuff and the automation and all of that and give that employee back the time to work, if we're talking about a call center, work with the customer on the harder issues, solve their problems. If we're talking about, what we call knowledge workers, people who aren't, necessarily frontline workers, I don't really like that term, but just for sake of clarity, um, it should be really kind of supercharging. Even if you go to think about the tools that Adobe has,
Yep.
it should be supercharging your productivity. It should be supercharging your creativity, your thinking. It shouldn't just be about it saved me 10 minutes from having to sit through a meeting. I don't think that that's enough.
No.
Companies need to be looking beyond that. And so that's where I think, some of these really smart solutions that I think do look beyond that, and really try to kind of supercharge, I think, the employee. Like, so for instance, Ring Central, they launched Ring X with RingSense AI. RingSense is their AI that kind of goes through, many of their different solutions. But it really does like allow you to capture things that you may have missed. It surfaces
Hmm.
insights. And they have this for sales, they have this for call center for their employee experience. And it really, what it does, and I've actually been using it for EX, it does supercharge that employee experience. And I think we've said this many times, the employee experience ultimately is going to be the customer experience. You've got
Absolutely.
employees. And so those are the things, that I think stood out for me at the event. There were a couple of other things, some device announcements. I liked one of the things I really love HP Poly. They have great all of their everything that they do with sound is amazing. So they released a new Voyager surround sound headphones. I'm not a huge headphone wearer. I like to either not have anything at all or have
These little ones.
I do have some of the HP Poly earbuds that I really like. I also have some Cisco ones that they did with Bang& Olufsen that I really like. But these
Mm.
ones are actually an over the head, this surround sound that's really meant for hybrid workers. So a couple of device things on that end. And then there were a couple of companies who did a few pre-announcements. 8x8 did a couple of pre-show announcements. One of them was their proactive outreach for call center, which we've talked about a little bit before. I think that's a solution that everybody's going to have to have. There
Hmm.
has to be proactive outreach. That's just super important. One of my favorites is Variant, their Time Flex bot. Now, this, we were talking before about the reason why you had your big delay at the airport was because of time scheduling issues, right? With flight attendants. And this happens all the
Yep.
time. I shared my experience with you about this happened with a pilot when I was flying internationally. So the Variant TimeFlex bot actually allows agents to have flexibility in scheduling their call center times with basically tokens, coins. Like say you start out
Hmm.
with like 100, then you use those to schedule with flexibility. So say like you want to give up a shift, you may have to, give a couple of coins because that's like a lower value shift where somebody may not want to take it. But then there's a shift that's available, but it's a holiday and you're like, oh, but I get a few extra tokens coins for taking that shift. Somebody called it like the Uberization of contact center scheduling. I don't necessarily like that term, but I do think it helps to clarify what you're trying to do actually, which is scheduling without a human involved in approving every single time request, right? I mean, that would have solved your problem on the airline, right?
Yeah. So I get on the airline after waiting 5 hours for a delay, getting ready to take off, and they're like, "Oh, the flight attendants are over their hours. we need to get new ones, and then we got to wait 2 hours. Well, didn't you know that when the plane landed, if they had this bot system and the scheduling, they would know, or maybe a good manager. But either way, they would have been able to figure it out and save 300 people 2 hours of sitting on the plane and getting in at all hours of the night. But these scheduling things are massive additions to help coordinate when you have situations like you're talking about, and I am.
Absolutely. And then I think the other thing, which was a kind of a pre-announcement from the show, but I think this is really important and it shows a trend, which is Zoom announced their compliance manager with Theta Lake. I know
Mm.
you're familiar with Theta Lake.
Mhm.
So it's with all of these collaboration tools, communication and collaboration tools, there are so many things that we have to be aware of when we are collaborating across different regions, different countries. There's different laws. There's different laws about what you can collect, what you can record, how you need to
Mhm.
notify people, privacy laws, all of these things. So Theta Lake has, this solution for compliance for communications. Zoom is only, just one of their customers. They actually work with RingCentral. They work with, I think, there's a whole list. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't want to name companies that aren't involved. But actually, many of these companies even invested in Theta Lake, which I just realized recently.
I'm sure.
Um, and a while ago, I wrote about there was a ruling, I think, in a New York court that an emoji was deemed investment advice. So it was a rocket ship emoji. So you have to be conscious of even emojis in your communication platform, because if you're talking to to a wealth, you're on a wealth management platform, say, and somebody gives you like a stock tip with a rocket ship emoji, that could be deemed investment advice. That could also be deemed insider
Mm.
trading. So
Interesting.
really, these companies have to be so aware of the compliance around these communication platforms. And I think that's something we need to dig in a little bit further, down the road, because that involves obviously a lot of data, which is back to
Always
your
a topic.
always the topic. So
You
I
know,
think
one thing. Well, I'll say it after you're done. But I was going to mention, there's so many applications, and you mentioned ROI previously, that I think instead of always buying the shiny new, toy, I think these companies need to take a look so they're actually benefiting versus adding and then actually not benefiting and then not using it, because it's easy to jump in and grab all these new tools, but at the same time, if it adds, time savings here, but then takes away and adds more manual work here to use it, integrate it, or your data is not right, then at the
yeah,
end of the day, it's not really a win. So I think the structure of adding these new applications needs to be also managed a little bit more closely, because it's easy to jump on the bandwagon, and but behind the covers or behind the curtain, it could be completely different.
absolutely. And I think that's, again, back to data, the integration. When you have the right data and you have the right tools, integration of any of these of new tools or any new platforms is going to be so much easier. And when you have
Hmm.
that, then you have the better adoption. And this is where I think companies like, my conversation with Javed from Cisco WebEx is that if you're not using a tool, let's fix that. Let's figure out why.
Hmm.
And I think there was a point where a lot of these companies were really trying to optimize for getting people back into the office. And now everybody's kind of, I shouldn't say everybody, because I'm actually working on some research now about how there are still many CEOs who think that people are going back to work full time. And even Cisco's Work Index, their most recent, and it's not called the Work Index study, that's Microsoft, but it's something, they've just released some data that they have, that they think that, a lot of the leaders still think that people are coming back to the office. But the reality is that people still want flexibility. And so you have
Hmm.
to optimize for both hybrid and in office. And there's a lot to that, of
Agreed.
figuring out how these tools work when you're in the office, making that work, because nobody wants to show up in an office and then sit at their laptop all day. So what are the tools that you can use that are when people are together in a room versus when somebody's at home, and how do you make them work, kind of seamlessly across that? And you also mentioned, if you're not using it, and we'll be with Zoho in a couple of weeks. Um, Zoho, I think, has done a really fantastic job of identifying when you're not using something. And
Hmm.
they'll go as far as saying, if you're not using it, stop paying for it. And I think that's
That's a
incredible.
great model.
Like,
Yeah,
who's going to be mad at a company that says that to you? But obviously, the goal is to figure out why people aren't using it and give them the tools to use it. But you also want to do work with a company that is upfront with you about stuff like that. Like, hey, I see you haven't been using this. Is this solution better for you? Or how can we help you to, make more use out of this thing you're paying for? And I think that's a great model. So
right.
we're way, I thought this was going to be like a quick 10-minute conversation. We're going into 30 minutes now.
Great
So
talk.
what do you have coming up?
And you're talking about data integration and tools to be used. I'm actually going to Software AG in Dublin, Ireland, which they specialize in their product. It's called Super iPass, which is a significant data integration tool, which is hybrid, on-premise, cloud applications, all different ways that they take those and put them all together to help you with your data set. So I'll be actually interviewing a couple of the executives there, talking to the customers and the partners and getting a little bit more information. So we're going to do a live feed and see how data is being handled in Dublin.
Awesome. Well, I'll look forward to doing that. I think we'll both be tuning in a little bit as we can into Google Next from virtually.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
then the following week, I'll be back in California for Avaya's analyst event. So lots of travel, lots of good stuff coming up. And then we will be kicking off our new podcast. Actually, that's a good segue into we're going to probably be rebranding the Hot Desk because as as we've seen just from this conversation, data has become such a big topic in this, and obviously where your specialty is. So how data and work come together, how data and modern work come together, and kick that off, as well as our hot desk, or not hot desk, game chat. See, when
Yep.
you do, now you can tell we're live. Um,
It's going to be fun. We got a lot of great stuff coming up, and it's hard to, align what we're going to do because there's so much to talk about. But we're gonna put it into enterprise apps, which we're going to call it Data Works, I believe, and then we're going to have our sports technology swim lane, which we're going to call that podcast Game Time Tech. So I think it's going to be really a just an opportunity for our customers to really talk about those different swim lanes and how they're benefiting and how we can help them tell their story.
yeah, I'm excited about all of those things, and now we get to have a nice rest restful also Easter weekend. I'm leaving
That's
DC in a
right.
few hours. You're in St. Louis, right?
Yes, I'll be going back to Virginia tomorrow, so be there for Easter, and looking forward to getting home after a long
Nice.
week. So,
And
but
then
yeah, this,
quickly back on the road. Well,
that's
anyway,
right.
this was great. Thanks for joining us, everybody, especially if you're watching this on a Saturday. We'll probably repost on Monday just to get it back up in feeds. But please, if you like what you saw, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Also, check us out. We're both on X. I still like to say Twitter, but it's X. And also LinkedIn. If you have any questions for us, if you have any suggestions for what we should talk about next, please hit us up, let us know, and we will see you. We'll probably be back on with a more in-depth. I'm not sure how much more in-depth we need because this was 30 minutes long. Maybe we'll be a little bit less in-depth, but we have some other things to talk about beyond Adobe Summit and Enterprise Connect. But thanks for joining us, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.